Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Spotlight on CS Ops. I'm here with Jean Herron. I'm here with my co-partner in crime, Matthew Lind, out of Austin, Texas. Hey, Matthew.
Hello, Jean. Great to see you.
Great to see you as well. And today we have the wonderful pleasure of speaking with Leah Clark. Leah is no, she's been in the space for a while here. She's no newcomer in the space, and she's worked with some great companies, including Okta, Outreach, Shopify. And so, wonderful to have you here, Leah, and just excited to kind of get your perspective on the world of CS and CS ops. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jean. So excited to be here. Start us off with, we sometimes say this question for the end, but I'm going to put it at the beginning. Tell us some of the trends you're seeing or some of the patterns you've seen with, I mean, that those series of stops are so interesting in companies that we know, especially in the B2B space. So tell us what you're seeing in the CS or CS ops space as trends.
Yeah, such a good question, and maybe perhaps sharing a little bit more context on my background might help put it into perspective. So I unusually and kind of non-traditionally got my start on the venture capital side of the house, where I was working go-to-market operations and strategy across a portfolio of companies. That model was later popularized, and you see all sorts of both venture capital and private equity groups building out in-house management consulting teams. But the idea was to parachute in to these struggling companies, turn them around, get them to profitability, get them in line with a board exit strategy, and really putting on our tool belt in order to, fix some of the challenges, not only performance-wise, but operationally, and, across go-to-market partnerships. Um, that coupled with my academic background in data science, where I studied churn and upsell propensity modeling through econometrics, and building out kind of health score algorithms. And then later in my career, when I joined Inventa, which was an AI and NLP, I'll call it precursor to ChatGPT, with semantic natural language understanding and applying these, AI solutions within the enterprise. I feel like I'm having an incredible sort of back to the future moment on sort of all sides, right? So when I think about the context that I entered VC land and these companies struggling with profitability, well, the macroeconomic trends have brought us back to a set of first principles around good governance and good practice when it comes to how do we achieve growth. We achieve growth through good achievement on the revenue side, but also a mind's eye on where are our costs within the business and how do we achieve net dollar retention efficiently. When I think about, the way that we're trying to scale our organizations now and what's trending, we have to get an understanding of what is the health of our customers? How can we pair their objectives with right product adoption in order to produce the outcomes that they so desperately need to see to justify the ROI of our solutions in order to retain? And then how can we do that with an efficiency of scale, alleviating some of the burdens and the pressure on human high touch interactions? How do we siphon off the first and second and third order conditions, leveraging this modern tool stack of, AI and machine learning and opportunities to innovate in a way that frees up our humans to be more consultative, to focus on those third, fourth, fifth order conditions, and really advise that customer to adopt a practice of change management, to evolve and to grow up a maturity curve and to deliver, financial outcomes back to their own businesses. So when I think about what's trending now and what's trended in my history that's kind of led me to, this moment, I'm incredibly excited to see the capability that we now have to achieve uh, these solutions at scale that actually free up human capacity. The thing that's trending now that was different in the past when I worked in the AI and NLP space is that, we had really rudimentary methods of trying to free up our humans. And that technical capability always led to a trough of disillusionment. Think about the period of time that we're talking about, 2016 to 2018, when Nuance and IBM Watson and even some of the early work that Google was doing, there was a lot of hype around AI. There wasn't really the proof in the pudding to back it up. What we're seeing now is that the market capability, the technical capability of these solutions are actually outpacing the maturity of many organizations. And so I don't think that this is, a hype cycle. I really think that, there's some tangible gains now to be made in a way where we're not just selling the moon and delivering a flashlight on AI. And that means that organizations, what I see as a trend, are trying to complete this rapid cycle of innovation and trying to figure out, how do we do this safely? How do we do it economically? How do we do it in a way that actually, gets us some benefit? And it comes out of experimentation mode and it comes into practical, applied, tangible ROI mode. And that's the difference in the shift, I think. I hope that answers your question, Matthew.
I think you've nailed a couple things that I really want to jump in on, because if I can reference your name there in Zoom, you appear to be the Jedi of maybe economic growth and how to drive cost structuring, or how to drive sort of more efficiency or productivity across teams. So I want to break this down a little bit, because I think these are all super big topics and a lot of meat on both pieces. You probably know how to use the Force to some degree on both or all three topics. I'm curious, how do you, when you come into a company, you start poking around, looking at what's going on, and figuring out what's what. How do you approach breaking down maybe what's currently happening across the company, across these different big items or these big topics? And then how do you go, you mentioned there experimentation and going from that to making it tangible. How do you approach that in your past or in your day-to-day now?
Oh, it's a really, really good question. I think when I'm coming in to evaluate, what is the health and the maturity of a customer success org, it really starts with understanding, what is the current CS charter? What is our identity within an organization? And what value are we meant to produce? So that leads me to a couple of questions, like who we are, what we do, how do we do it, how do we measure it, and what is the expected value that we deliver both to customers as well as back to the business. That's usually where the problems start, right? And what I found is that with customer success being the new kid on the go-to-market block, there is the broadest spectrum I've ever seen across a go-to-market discipline in just answering those basic and fundamental questions around a charter. On one end of the spectrum, you have organizations that have a very legacy, I'll call it, approach, where they've got, CS kind of grew up as an extension of the TAM or the support organization. There are very traditional disciplines present, like account management. There's technical support. There's some element of services sprinkled in, and it was more of a Jenga piece of how do we squeeze CS into this, thing that we've already built. Then you've got on the other side of the spectrum, very pioneering organizations that were kind of born in the cloud and doing product-led growth, and their success is just kind of permeated throughout every essence of their being. And finding where customers are at, where my customers are at in terms of assessing the health of is CS producing the anticipated and desired outcomes for customers and for the business? There's just a wide delta when it comes to achievement. So I start with, what is the charter? How does that charter translate into the strategy? How does that strategy get operationalized and executed? And then what are the technology, data, systems, insights that we need in order to truly kind of power scale? I firmly believe that the biggest mistake that I see CS organizations making is either before bringing on a CS org or sometime after experimenting with CS, is divorcing customer success from revenue. We are responsible for discovering and rediscovering the customer's objectives. We're responsible for driving a number of different facets of customer health proactively in terms of leading indicators. We own the success plan to get a customer from here to there in terms of achieving their objectives. And we should be expected to deliver a certain value back to those customers and demonstrate the true return on investment. And I mean quantifiable return on investment. And we should be the first ones to know about those opportunities where the pump can be primed for growth. We are responsible for forecasting that impact of the leading indicators on the lagging indicators financially when it comes to gross retention, net retention, being mindful of margin. And we should identify what is that critical path going forward to get to predictable revenue. So, it's understanding the who we are, the what we do, the how do we measure it, and then, what is the value that we deliver back. And that gets really fuzzy sometimes. What I would say is that while I am passionate that CSMs are attached to the outcomes that impact the business, namely around revenue and around efficiency, I would say that's depending on the complexity of the organization, the technology, and solutions that organization is providing to their customers. Sometimes it takes a village, of resources in order to execute against that. And so we can talk about more sophisticated layering of different identities across go-to-market in order to make that outcome producible and reproducible. Does CSM have commercial responsibility? Well, probably not in terms of the transacting of paper, right? It becomes bigger than a bread box. But those are some of the considerations that I start to go through. Happy to dive in deeper there.
So interesting. I have a question about the charter because I've heard other people say a flavor of this, or maybe a new leader arrives to a customer success organization and they're figuring their identity out or their new identity under a new leader. Do you feel like there's a small number of is the menu of charters fairly small when it comes to a CS organization? Are there 3 or 4 or 8 things that a CS organization probably is doing or should be doing? Or do you feel like, nope, it's as creative as that CS leader wants to be? If they want to go invent something entirely new and then run with it, as long as it provides value to the business, more power to them. Give me your perspective there.
Yeah, I would say that there's a lot of latitude around the how do we do what we do. But in terms of the primary objectives of what we should be doing, I think I adopt a different point of view. I think that we've almost had too much ambiguity, too much latitude, and it's created a lot of confusion in the market. I would say that, success does look different based on different maturities of organizations, right? Because you are solving different needs when you are a super duper early baby startup than when you are a, large, well-established Fortune 500 kind of enterprise. And you have a different availability of resources to support your, your CSMs or across, kind of go to market. What are those interlocks and areas of responsibility? But I really do think that it comes back to those core accountabilities of discovering customers' objectives, driving customer health, pairing that with the right product adoption in order to produce the right value and demonstrate that back to the customer, identifying those opportunities for growth. Let's be clear. The whole reason why success was invented was a recognition that, by Salesforce that said, we're in this new subscription-based economy. We don't have the benefit of, perpetual licenses. We can get fired at any time. And we recognize that we have to adopt a product. We've got to use a product. We've got to ensure we're leveraging best practices, and we've got to continuously innovate against our utilization of that product in order to deliver continuous value and thus justify every day being a renewal day, every day being an opportunity for expansion. So, that was like our prima facie burden. Like our objective number one was to protect that revenue and to ensure the opportunity to grow that revenue, to make sure that we had permission every day to seek out those opportunities to grow. And I think that we've perhaps deviated a bit. We've gotten almost too creative with how we're thinking about what it means to success. And sure. I wish to get us back to those core, kind of founding principles of our discipline. And I think that that'll provide an awful lot of clarity across this go-to-market mixture. I'm really passionate about this area. Oh, I'm sorry, Matthew, maybe just quickly.
I was just appreciating the distinction you led with in that answer, which was maybe the what we've gotten too creative on, but the how. Okay, there's a lot of latitude in the how, and it might vary by, yes, the age of your organization. I would suggest it probably varies by your operating model. If you are a product-led growth company versus something that's very high touch, okay, the how is going to look different. But I love this idea of the what being quite centered, and I too have wondered if customer success as an industry has maybe languished or found itself with darker clouds than some of the other go-to-market functions, because there's been some ambiguity in exactly like, what does that CS team do again? Why is it different than the last company I worked at? When the sales team always does the same thing. Everybody, marketing, oh yeah, their charters seem pretty similar, but the CS thing seems like every place I go, it's a little different.
Big old question mark. Yeah. And I think it's those question marks that are producing an inherent financial volatility. So the biggest conundrum that I see most regularly, and this is particularly acute when we're in sort of like profitability mode and responsible growth mode and predictable revenue, mode, and making sure that we are getting to sustainable growth. The biggest question that CFOs are asking themselves right now is, will the real one who influences NDR please stand up? Because right now a CFO has got 5 disciplines across go-to-market, sales and marketing and, sort of like all of the functions, professional service, everyone saying, I drive net dollar retention. And there is a space for that, to say that, go-to-market teams need to be integrated in the way that they drive net dollar retention. Everyone does have a role to play. But it should be a non-redundant role. It should be a unique role, and it should be a role that is mindful of margin, because the number of times where CS is sitting on the same call as sales, that's sitting on the same call as professional services. Like, do you realize that the costing that is going into everyone just trying to listen in on the same customer call to identify like what's at risk and what is the growth opportunity? It's highly inefficient. So, having that clarity of who owns the success plan, owning does not necessarily mean responsible for the line item task. That you'll factor out in your RACI. But let's get to a great co-factored RACI that understands across a customer lifecycle who's on point for what, when, where, and why, and who has delegated responsibility for that set of discrete tasks that are not duplicative, that are not us tripping over our siblings' feet across the go-to-market landscape.
Yeah, and I promise, Sean, this will be my last comment, and then I'll quit talking for a minute. But in addition to that being very expensive call, the customer is bewildered why there are 9 people on their last sync call. I'm like, why are all these people here? And now I have a question. I wonder which one of the 9 I call to get clarity on X, Y, or Z.
Absolutely. I think, to that end, some of the solvency mechanisms have been to put CSM at the center of the customer experience, because it has become so confusing. Who does the customer go to for what, when, where, and why? The problem with that is that now you've got a single point of failure with your CSM at the center of that customer's experience. You've also got an inherent bottleneck of the CSM can only handle so many accounts, and that requires a very manual kind of high, personalized high touch motion. And it's not scalable. So, defining your discrete areas of responsibility, but also for the customer, redefining what are the channels that they can leverage, who do they go to for what, about what sorts of things, and really training and educating that customer how they can be empowered to be at the center of their own experience, and to create the right supporting infrastructure around that customer at the center. That CSM becomes one resource. We're a resource that's dedicated to demonstration of value and making sure that based on your objectives, we're achieving that value. When we're not, then we bring in additional resources, and everyone has got their individual kind of role to play across sales, across services, across support, product engineering, etc.
I like this because you're touching on like a lot of topics that are dear to my heart. I think, having a charter, having roles and responsibilities, understanding who's on what position, and the whole notion of like you're a team, you're trying to get, I always think of it like a sports analogy in a way, but like you're trying to get points on the board. Your role as an individual is not necessarily to just drive assists. What you have is assists and options, but the end goal is to get points on the board. And so I think when I think of that, like, how do we drive, more sort of commercialization of CS, or how do we make sure that there's a charter? Is there is there tangible things that you think, CS ops people or practitioners can apply in their day-to-day? Like apart from just like calling the, the leader every day and saying, hey, we still don't have a charter. Like, is there something that's like tangible that you would suggest, people to start working on, or to start trying to help their organization mature?
Yeah, I think that there's a couple of things in development of a charter. Again, it brings me back to those kind of, they feel simple, but those few questions around who are we? What do we do? How do we do it? How do we measure it? And defining that value are the basic components of a charter. So, in terms of the who we are as success practitioners, we define that again as the discoverer of our objectives and the owners of various facets of account health or customer health, and then the ownership of the success plan. What does that mean? What does that look like? What are the processes that are attached to it? Who do we partner with? You define that by like life cycle stage. You define that by kind of the milestones within those life cycles. You identify who are the partnering groups that you need to assign roles and responsibilities to, and taking that approach to charter building, I think, has provided not only great clarity, but incredible efficiency and a reclamation of capacity that, feels so inaccessible in these tight economic times. Many organizations right now are grappling with a, net neutral headcount. We are going to keep headcount flat. We might make some investments in technology, but we've got to do the best with what we've got. I like to say, instead of doing more with less, we do more with different. And when we can get to better efficiencies, our account loading ratios improve. When we get to better efficiencies, we are, achieving better margins. We're usually achieving better, better retention and growth outcomes, and optimal, customer value delivery. So I think it's really interesting when I look at most organizations coming in, and I just did this exercise with a recent group, but definitely based on my history. I see a leakage of time spent customer facing, where usually 60 to 70% of a CSM's time is spent on activities not driving net dollar retention. And I've got a whole series of subset. We could do an entire session on, what are the types of activities. I do a very detailed kind of time and motion analysis around, a number of different buckets. But 60 to 70% of a CSM's time is not spent on customer facing activities, let alone ones that drive net dollar retention. Even when you get a customer success platform installed, you might see an incremental increase of a few percentage points when it comes to getting more time customer facing. But until you start dealing with these more, strategic, these more operational items of charter roles and responsibilities, kind of what are the desired outcomes from your CS team, you're going to keep kind of spinning the hamster wheel around this difficulty of, I don't have enough CSM capacity. I have more accounts than I'm able to load my CSMs at, and I'm capped at the outcomes that they're going to be able to produce.
When you talk about charter, I think it's important to note as well, like, it's not just about a piece of paper or a slide deck that has this thing. Like, there's so much content out there and books about how do you really operationalize, visions, missions, goals, all those things. And like the repeatability of like communicating, like, this is our mission, this is our mission, this is our mission, this is our mission, is so incredibly important. I think some companies or some teams just like, it becomes a piece of paper, it sits on the bookshelf somewhere, but it doesn't really get like internalized or become part of the DNA of the company. And so I truly believe that. And we see that all the time in like great teams, great companies. Like, that's one common element, that they're always focused all together, rowing in the same direction. And everyone in the company can actually say the charter, or can actually like explain what it means, and to be able to describe the key goals and whatnot. And I think to your roles and responsibility thing, like, most, like in that example, I've hit that example like so many times, exactly as you described it. Like 70-80% of the time is spent on all these other things. And a CSM can't even often like articulate, here's my actual role. Like, it becomes this like, oh, here's the buffet of things that I do. But it, getting crisper around what that is and focus will help them, put points on the scoreboard. And so I really like that approach.
So I think that's what a new CS leader needs to do coming aboard any org is, saying to themselves, do we have the right charter? Do we have the right areas of responsibility? Do we have the right activities kind of happening throughout the customer lifecycle in order to drive net dollar retention and our efficiencies? And are we tied incentive-wise to the right outcomes in order to encourage the right behaviors to make that all happen? Where ops fits in this is really part and parcel to that CS, leader or CS leadership team in designing, building, and governing that CS practice framework. So when it comes to a CS ops charter, we have to be, as ops practitioners, we have to be responsible for the strategy, the planning, the communication. We have to prepare the data and insights that are going to measurably drive the business forward. We've got to own and be responsible for the systems, the platforms, and the tooling to enable our folks to be freed up in terms of capacity. We've also got to have a mind's eye on the projects, the kind of programs, and the portfolio management to support some of these transformations of the business. But we've also got to center too on, owning the service model. And so when you look at like, what is the business model of CS? What is the operating model of CS? What is the economic and funding model of CS? And then what is the engagement model? Like the ops needs to produce and deliver that value back to the business. And I think it's supportive of the charter, right? We've got our CS charter up top, and then the how are we going to do it? That's largely the charter of CS operations that all need to be factored, have ownership. Some of these are shared services, right? Like CS Ops doesn't own everything related to this. These are many functions that might be housed in a centralized operations model within your organization, or, some of the ownership on IT. But we have to have a finger on the pulse of all of these things, and we have to make sure that the business is meeting the needs of the CS organization in the same way that, sales and sales operations partner together with those centralized functions in order to make fetch happen, I would say.
What are some of the I've got a question and it's not coming to me. The words are not quite coming to me. But like, what are the characteristics of a great CS ops organization in light of what you just shared? Like, maybe starting with where should they sit? And I cringe sometimes at the where should they sit? Should they sit in CS or should they sit in a revenue operations model? Because sometimes I'm like, it's a little bit less about where they sit than the habits that are developed and the processes that are enforced regardless of where they sit. But just what's your vote? Put your thumb on the scale. And then regardless of where the CS ops organization is placed, like what are the characteristics of a CS ops organization that probably are signaling success?
Such an existential question you've asked me, Matthew. I have a number of thoughts, and the reason I feel uniquely positioned to comment on these number of thoughts is within a 2.5-year period, I, as leading CS and had kind of de facto responsibility around owning CS ops as well, because that particular organization was too small to, invest in kind of a dedicated CS ops team. But as a CS leader, based on the needs of the business, I reported into CRO, COO, CPO, Chief Product Officer, CEO for a short period of time, and then back over to CRO. Now, in fairness, the reason for that was we had grown up as a solution. In our earliest days, we were a professional services organization for hire. Like really, we were consultants and we had like a little bit of a SaaS application that we would sell. We eventually, kind of turned the corner and we became a SaaS product, but we were a pretty point and shoot sort of SaaS product. And then, in our real evolution, we became true platform as a service. And in that evolution of platform as a service, making sure that we were delivering current day value of the solution, painting a picture of that future day value through a new kind of product vision, beginning to get our early customers into our beta programs in order to, kind of keep that R&D and innovation engine going. that was tough business. And so when you ask me about where should CS ops sit, it's like, well, if CS is reporting into chief product officer to make sure that we're building the solutions to deliver the value to customers while we're, kind of changing the engine and flying the plane all at the same time, then, the question becomes, I don't know where CS ops sits in that, in that kind of setting. I would have said it probably would have been better to have a centralized kind of revenue ops function and probably some dedicated talent that served the CS side of the org at that juncture. I guess I'll make a long story short and I'll say you are where you sit for sure in terms of ease of facilitation across groups, in terms of ready and upfront alignment around the objectives, and easier execution when you're that tightly aligned. It really depends on the maturity of the business. It certainly depends on what are some of the evolutions that we're looking to transform the business concurrently. And I've seen models work out really well where there's a centralized ops function. I've seen models work out really well where there's a dedicated ops function to CS. What I would say is the biggest mistake where I see CS ops kind of nested under revenue ops, and revenue ops is really just a different moniker or handle for sales ops. And then nobody's needs are really getting met uniquely. That is hyper problematic. We have to think about operations when it comes to customers, prospects. We've got to be smarter about the way that cross-functionally we need to share information and making sure that we have a very even hand in supporting both net new customer motions as well as existing customer motions. And we have to be faster at doing the pattern recognition of when those needs intersect and overlap and making sure that we're supporting it. I hope that that's helpful.
I think,
Love it.
yeah,
I love it. Go ahead, John.
and I think it's helpful, and I think you're hitting the nail on the head. Like, it's not about where you sit; it's more about the practice and what you deliver, and hopefully where you sit doesn't impede you on that. So I think that's really important. I wonder too, like, because you're someone who's played CS leader, CS structuring, or probably architecting or whatever you want to call it, and then maybe in operations. I suspect you have this feeling too, because I've often thought like the role of CS ops is not just the CS ops team. Like, I think the CS leadership, the the directors, the VPs, the SVPs, whatever, all have a play in that. And it has to be kind of like almost like we often talk, like you hear a lot of companies talk about, like there's customer success, the department, and then there's customer success as a whole. Like the whole company should be driving customer success. And so I almost feel the same way as well, like with operations, that the notion of like some of the components that you were talking about, like what are we doing, who are we, how are we doing it, how are we measuring it, that has to be like a combined collaboration and workflow where leaders and managers and whoever come to the table to really like form and build this thing together, versus like one little team, or hopefully they're not too little, one lone ranger, one lone team trying to build this for this greater CS team, right? I assume that's probably how you would see it as well.
This is the concept that I think I struggle with mostly, because at any end of the spectrum, it's pretty dangerous territory. On one end of the spectrum is that the over rotation. Well, success is success job. Like I'm over here kind of doing my thing in sales and support and services. And like success is really the responsibility of the success team. That's super dangerous. On the other side of the spectrum is customer success is a company-wide thing and everyone has to own it. Well, if everyone's owning it, then nobody does. If there's, so there's this interesting, kind of layer in between. And I think that the big problem with those two kind of tails of the spectrum is when we haven't defined what success is, and we've spoken, a lot about that today in terms of what does it mean for a charter, and how does that translate into the ways that we should measure the success of that success team. So if we're speaking more broadly about how do we lead a customer through a cycle, how do we sustain change management, how do we deliver, value of our technological solutions, how do we encourage, that sticky adoption that we know is going to translate into financial outcomes, then yes, there are a number of disciplines within our organization, a number of functions within our organization that need to operate in lockstep to make that happen. And we've got to make that journey, that attainment against that journey from the customer's perspective, we've got to make that a company-wide imperative. When it comes to, who owns the that discovery and rediscovery of objectives, to own kind of the success plan, to own what is the right pairing of the right product adoption against the right desired outcomes in order to deliver value, and then who's responsible for articulating that. That I think is the job of the success team. And so I think separating out what does success mean in the macro sense versus what does success mean within within a more discrete and concrete sense is probably what's helpful there.
Very good.
Appreciate that
yeah.
focus for success, because I have observed, maybe even worked for a couple organizations where success was the concierge to the customer, or success was the person you went to when you just had to get some message to the customer. We're raising their price, we're having a support escalation, whatever it is, like, that's CSM. It's the one we go talk to. We just give that message to them and they will courier it off to the customer. And I just love this idea that, like, success has a mission. Success has a focus and a purpose. That's not this squishy, when you make the customer happy, we just sort of take care of them.
The other dangerous thing is, like, we're in the business of customer delight or customer happiness, or even better yet, customer satisfaction. I still see all around. It's like, no, we're in the business of delivering customer value. We're in the business of in that value delivery, producing financial outcomes for our own organization. But I love what you said there, Matthew. I think there's a number of, in doing this time and motion analysis, understand, like, who are CSMs actually touching in their day-to-day responsibilities. You will see this inordinate eye chart, and it's really an illuminative exercise. I would recommend that anyone who is in an ops function that is trying to support their leaders in bringing clarity to the question of who we are, what we do, how we do it, how do we measure it, that you just start to whiteboard out, starting with, kind of mind map style. Put your CSM at the center and start to create all of the tentacles of the folks that they reach across the aisle to, and the different tasks and activities. So it's sort of a visual version of time and motion. And what you will end up with is this incredible spider chart, again, that represents 60 to 70% of activities that are not spent customer facing, that are not meant to deliver, value, that are not meant to produce net dollar retention outcomes. And you will start to see what is your top hits list of things that we can eliminate. My favorite are, like, CSMs chasing down, like, accounts receivable invoices because they were the last person to touch the customer. It's gone dark, and now, our finance teams can't get, a customer to pay their bill. Or, we're in a potential legal escalation where a customer feels as though we haven't met an SLA, and the CSM is quarterbacking across this kind of escalation. And, it happens particularly when we put CSMs as the concierge, as the face of everything. They become the, kind of jack of all trades, master of none. And you can see that visually, and it's a real aha moment anytime you're looking to persuade your leadership, to educate your leadership on what is the true role and value of customer success. That's oftentimes in education. Many folks, because we're the new kid on the block, our executives sometimes just don't know what customer success is and should be. And when you start to paint these pictures of all of the different things that CSMs are touching that are outside of our core competencies, it really helps, I think, bring clarity in that executive level enablement, that buy-in, that stakeholder management that you're going to need in order to build your business case for CS transformation and kind of change within your organization.
Well, with that note, I guess that you've given us like so many tidbits. There's been so much like meat to unpack. I think this could be like, the starting of a PhD level course or something on CS. Yeah, I think this has been incredibly insightful, and yeah, I just want to echo, super excited that you were able to join us and then walk us through like some of your practices and how your thoughtful approach to customer success and how it should be integrated into the business.
Oh, thank you so much, Sean. Really appreciated the opportunity to be here. And Matthew, so great to connect with you and to chat today.
100%. What a great conversation. And yes, I echo thoughtful, the word thoughtful, not in exclusively the gracious way where we sometimes use thoughtful, but like full of thought. You clearly put some brain cells against these ideas, and thank you for sharing them with us today.
My pleasure.